Taking a live look at the U.S. Capitol tonight, we are just 25 minutes away from what is expected to be a short but partial government shutdown. Thanks for joining us for this special report. I'm WUSA 9 anchor Larry Miller reporting from Washington, D.C. And over the next hour, we are going to break down how we got here, what's next, and what lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are demanding moving forward. Let's get up to speed, though, on where we stand with those ongoing negotiations. WUSA 9's Randy Hildreth joining us right now with the latest on the shutdown, which will begin at midnight, but only is expected to last just to the weekend when the House reconvenes on Monday, and they will, in fact, vote again. Randy?
Yeah, good evening to you, Larry. That Senate vote wrapped up just before 7 p.m. Eastern tonight. The final vote, 71-29 to pass the funding package, hours ahead of the deadline. But I want to be clear to you tonight, this is just the first hurdle. After tonight's vote, the House still needs to vote on the funding package. As you mentioned, that won't happen until Monday, so there will still be a partial shutdown until we can check that box. I want to break down what was on the table. Senators voted on 5 bills to fund multiple agencies through September. For example, the Labor Department, the Transportation Department. The compromise in this, though, was the funding for DHS. That agency is only funded for 2 weeks at its current level. Democrats said they want to discuss immigration enforcement before they would commit to more. The debate over funding DHS erupted after a second person was killed in a shooting involving ICE agents in Minneapolis. So you mentioned, what are Democrats demanding? I want to break that down. They are demanding an end to roving ICE patrols, require ICE to wear body cameras. They want rules around what kind of warrants immigration officers can use to enter homes. They also want to ban agents from covering their faces. Here is the latest reaction to tonight's vote.
The American people are crying out for change. They see what's happening on our streets.
Hold the people accountable in ICE who may have broken the law, but stand up for those in the field trying to protect America.
Of the partial shutdown could be minimal. We're hearing the House could vote by 6:30 Monday, plus the shutdown is happening as we're headed into the weekend. Back to you.
All right, Randy, certainly appreciate the update, but we know that the fight is certainly far from over. We'll see you momentarily. Thank you very much. Let's bring in our panel. Sherlyn Harley-Laban, she's a former senior counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Dominic Thompson, executive director of the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. Thank you both for being here. We certainly appreciate it. I mean, obviously we're both from Washington, all from Washington here, so we certainly know that the drama that's going on. These negotiations sort of set up sort of the interesting talks that will take place on Monday, at least in the House, as it relates specifically to that funding for DHS. It does seem, though, that this argument that we're seeing is a bit different. One, because it really is the public opposition to what they've seen in Minneapolis and through other parts of the country that's really leading the charge for people to think about this a bit differently and a bit more critically. Where do you stand on this?
So, I mean, obviously, a good portion of DHS has already been funded. Like $76 billion is already funded for the next 5 years. So this part of what we're talking about coming up for the next weekend is another sort of section, right? It's started a whole other conversation to open the door about the current events that are happening. So I'm not sure we've ever seen something like this happen before, but it is an interesting time, and it's also interesting to see what will happen in the House on Monday. You know, it all remains to be seen. But the important point is that, you know, a good portion, this is just a limited shutdown. I think that you know, Americans need to understand that it's a limited shutdown. Only a certain number of agencies will be impacted. DOD, HHS, Transportation, HUD. So it's not like the full-on shutdown that we saw in October that lasted for 43 days.
Right, so we're not going to see hundreds of thousands of people furloughed. And
we're not going to see like over 600,000 federal employees, which were furloughed during the shutdown earlier.
Right, so we won't see that, but there still will be impacts nonetheless.
Correct, especially because we're talking about DOD. And DOD affects so many federal government contractors who now have to think about the work that's interrupted. They have to figure out what to do with their employees. They have to communicate with their contracting officers. So there still is that's going on because, of course, DOD is the largest federal agency with the largest budget.
And what sort of impact from the work that you've done do shutdowns, either short or small, have on the contracting workforce?
Correct.
Because the work that they do really is critical to our national security.
Absolutely. So for the contractors that are engaged in mission critical work, so that tends to be contractors working in the cleared space, right? Their work should most likely continue, okay? Because it's mission critical. But other contractors, right, that are just doing other DoD work, this may impact them. And so it's very important for them to communicate with their contracting officers because, again, sort of every program within agencies vary, right? And so that's why it's really important for contractors to communicate with their contracting officers, figure out what that means for their own company and their own employees and what can and cannot be done. And also, most importantly, they also need to keep track of the expenses that they're incurring because some of those can be reimbursable.
You know, considering your background, I'm curious for you, people on Capitol Hill have certainly used the shutdown as a tactic, a negotiation tactic when it comes to legislation. Would you like to see it go away in this regard?
I would, because I think that, you know, Americans and people all over the world are impacted by these shutdowns. And so, I mean, the business of the government is $1 trillion industry, government contracting. So when you have these shutdowns, the impact is just, it's worldwide. And I think people need to understand that.
Now, well, Dominic, when we think about what's been transpiring in Minneapolis, we know that the events that have taken place there really have shaped the conversation that we're seeing here in Washington. Based on what you've been talking about with your sources and your contacts here on Capitol Hill, I'm curious for you, do Democrats feel like the tide is turning as it relates to the public opposition to what they've been seeing in terms of ICE and its enforcement of immigration policy nationwide?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at what's happening in Minnesota currently, you know, and it's happening throughout the nation, but there's such a focus on Minnesota at the moment. You know, you've had 2 American citizens now who have been, you know, killed by federal ICE enforcement officers. Right now, the agency looks like a rogue agency. It looks out of control. It looks like it's in chaos. And so, you know, a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill are feeling the pressure to say, are we going to fund an agency, you know, that's rogue, unaccountable, and that, you know, now members of Congress are even having difficulty getting into ICE facilities, which they're supposed to be able to enter at any moment, right? So, you know, it's really a question with this government shutdown. And as we get into a partial shutdown over the weekend, but then also probably another protracted one later on, it's really a question of, are we as a government going to vote to actually fund an agency that doesn't seem to be accountable to our democracy?
And it does appear as if some Republicans are at least open to a measure of reforms.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that, you know, we don't really know what went on there because I think that, I mean, we know a gun went off, and when those things happen, it's always very, you know, it devolves into a very bad situation. I think that DHS Inspector General's office is going to conduct an investigation, as they should. That is their role to do that. I also think there's some questions about the chain of custody regarding the gun that went off, and I think we need to understand that. There's body cam footage that we still need to investigate. So, like so many Americans, we'd like to know what exactly happened there.
Yeah, and we want the full picture.
Yeah, we want the full picture.
If I can add on to that, though, you know, I think that a large part of the reason why DH funding, you know, is being looked at so heavily right now, right, is you really can't trust this administration and their accounts of events. Right? Whenever they go out and call every person who's being killed by ICE a domestic terrorist and saying that, you know, they were actively working to harm ICE agents, right? And we can see from video footage that that's not true. You know, that the line coming from the administration isn't true. I don't think most Americans feel like there will be a fair process to actually investigate and get to the bottom and make sure that there's justice in a case like this, especially with Alex Peretti. So, I mean, you know, a really large part of the reason why ICE funding is going to be so contentious over the next few weeks because they have 2 weeks to make a deal for a portion, as you were saying, a portion of that ICE funding. You have to realize that part of it is Americans right now don't really trust the government, in the Trump administration when they say they're going to do something in regards to ICE.
Well, that's why I think it's really important for the Inspector General to do a thorough investigation, to look at that body cam footage, because that is the role of the Inspector Generals at these agencies. Right. And so they're independent, which is a very good thing. They're independent, and they need to do a thorough investigation, because we need to understand what happened.
And certainly the American people deserve answers,
Absolutely.
regardless of how this all comes down in the end. I want to get to Republican Andy Harris, representing Maryland's 1st Congressional District. I had the opportunity to speak with him a few hours ago. Here's what he had to say.
Congressman, I want to get your thoughts today on the passage of that bill that took place in the Senate this evening. How are you feeling about it? Do you feel that there could be some compromise eventually with Democrats and Republicans as it relates specifically to DHS funding?
Well, I hope there is a compromise at some point, because we've got FEMA in the DHS bill, we've got TSA in the DHS bill, and obviously, there are a lot of important things the Department of Homeland Security does. I wish the Senate had just agreed to the bill, and we wouldn't again be facing another cliff in a couple of weeks. But hopefully, the president can negotiate something with the Democrats and the Republicans to get us all on board, so we fund the Department of Homeland Security before the February 13th deadline.
Democrats are pushing for reforms that they say are necessary, kind of citing what happened in Minneapolis, saying that ICE has been too aggressive. How do you feel about it?
Well, ICE has been active in all 50 states, and really the only place where the pushback has been is in Minneapolis, where, of course, the governor and the mayor have basically condoned the anti-ICE activity. So in the other states where, again, the local officials have not done the same thing, there hasn't been a problem. So you wouldn't want to change it nationwide for what's going on in Minneapolis. Now, that being said, we've agreed to body cameras being worn by the ICE agents. I personally feel that we should have independent investigations when we have a shooting, like we do with any law enforcement agency. But again, the need to get a judicial warrant goes way beyond what has been done for decades with regards to what ICE does and what ICE can do. Because again, they're going after people who are not U.S. citizens, and they're not afforded the same rights of judicial warrant as a U.S. citizen is.
The majority of U.S. Americans feel that ICE may be a bit too aggressive in the way in which it's approaching its enforcement. Do you feel that there might be an opportunity for some compromise here, at least specifically as it relates to the tactics that ICE uses to enforce immigration laws?
Well, I think appointing Tom Homan to get in charge of this, I think was a very good move by the president. Tom Homan has worked for both administrations, Democrat and Republican administrations, been appointed by President Biden, of course, to his last job. So the bottom line is that Tom Homan is the right person to get this done right, and I think he's going to find that balance between doing what the American people want is actually to make sure that illegal aliens, especially the ones who commit crimes, are deported, and they're deported promptly. And again, the concerns, like I mentioned, that we have independent investigations, that we use body cameras, we do the things we normally do when law enforcement is involved. But again, ICE agents are law enforcement agents; they should be respected. These crowds in Minneapolis that don't respect law enforcement, and where local law enforcement has been instructed basically not to help. That just shouldn't go on. That's not the way we do things in America. This is a law and order country, and again, that's what we should be doing around the United States. And again, in 49 out of the 50 states, we don't have the problem. It's really just in Minneapolis.
All right, Congressman, anything else that you want to add that I didn't ask you?
Well, again, it's too bad that the government's going to be, going to have a partial shutdown for 3 days. Again, the Senate probably should have done this earlier. Had the Senate done this earlier in the week, we might have been able to get it called back. But now, of course, with the winter storm approaching, it makes it very difficult to get members back in Washington before Monday. So hopefully we deal with this Monday night.
Do you anticipate any issues come Monday night?
There might be, even though Chuck Schumer negotiated this bill, just barely half of the Democrat senators voted for his deal. So I hope that we have a similar number of Democrats supporting it in the House, because if we don't, it's going to be a heavy lift in the House.
Of course, we will see how it all shakes out in Washington. We know there will be plenty of action there, no doubt. Congressman, good to see you as always. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, we also spoke with Maryland Congressman Glenn Ivey, and we talked about the shutdown and why he says that Democrats feel that DHS reforms cannot go unignored.
We need to take steps to make sure that ICE gets reined in, the Border Patrol get reined in. I think they need to be pulled out of the cities, certainly in the volume that they have there. You know, like a year ago, you had about 100 ICE officers in Minneapolis. Now you have 3,000. That's like 6 times more than the number of police officers that they have in the city combined. So, you know, they've overdone it. They've been breaking the law. They've been breaking into people's houses without warrants and the like. It's time for them to be reined in. And I think it's also time for Noam to go. She's done a terrible job. She's in over her head. And the chain of command at Homeland Security is broken, I think in part due to her mismanagement of the agency. So they need to get a complete overhaul over there, and they need to get moving on that sooner rather than later. And that's why we're trying to force this issue on the Trump administration.
Is this the best means of doing this, though? Is there another means that wouldn't have an impact on people's livelihoods that would be a way in which to address this and also push through your concerns and hopefully get a resolution to them?
Sure, we could have Republicans agree that, for example, deportation of citizens is illegal and should not be done. Detaining U.S. citizens by ICE, that shouldn't be happening either. Those are the types of things we've been asking for, and the Republicans have refused to agree to those. Now, I do see some steps in the right direction. You've had Republicans in the House and Senate agree that there are problems with the shooting, certainly with Mr. Preddy, and agreeing to have some hearings. There's the silence is deafening about Republican defense of Secretary Noam. I think they all recognize what a bad job she's doing and that ICE is off course for sure and needs a major course correction, to say the least. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully we'll get there sooner rather than later.
How far are Democrats willing to go in order to see this through? I mean, last shutdown was 43 days, with eventually Democrats joining Republicans and getting that continuing resolution passed. How far are Democrats willing to go this time?
Well, it's hard to say at this point, but I think it's everybody. There's a growing concern, certainly within the Democratic Party, but I think as well as Republicans, and even the Trump White House is recognizing that ICE is, is out of control. I mean, they're killing people. They have people dying in custody. They're seizing a 5-year-old and holding him in detention. Shooting canisters of tear gas and the like at protesters who were just exercising their First Amendment rights. He said he was going to focus on the worst of the worst, rapists, killers, and the like, but that's clearly not what they're doing. They're doing racial profiling and casting a broad net. And I think the Wall Street Journal just pointed out that only 5% of the ICE arrests have included people who have violent criminal records. So, they're off track. The focus is wrong. I know Trump is one of those guys that he can't admit that he's made a mistake, but something's going to have to give here because people can't keep dying and being arrested at the rates that they have been.
Let's bring in Dr. Karen Holt, professor of political science at Virginia Tech University. Dr. Holt, it seems like we're having sort of a broader conversation, not just about an agency, but just also about the general treatment of individuals generally. Give us your assessment in terms of what this debate really represents and where are we headed?
All very good and all very difficult questions, to be sure. It seems to me, I actually don't agree with the congressman who said this is a Minneapolis only problem. I think it's a little bit broader than that, but I think there is real concern among members of the citizenry across the United States about how individuals are being treated by government authorities at all sorts of levels. But it's certainly come to a flashpoint in terms of the operation of of DHS personnel, not just ICE, but also Border Patrol and some of the others. And that kind of effort makes people wonder about, do I need to continually look over my shoulders as to what's going to happen to me or people I care about that live in my neighborhood or whom I teach in the classroom. And what we've seen with regard to racial profiling, picking out people based not so much on what their records suggest they may have done or their lack or not having documentation on them, but basically saying we really need to expand this further and start saying about how are we treating individuals as human beings and as residents of a representative democracy. And that kind of discussion is difficult to have because people draw all kinds of lines ideologically, in partisan terms, in religious terms as well. All of those things, I think, are at issue here with regards that have come to a head, of course, with the situation that's happened most recently in Minneapolis.
Dr. Holt, Fox News polling showing that 59% of voters say that ICE is too aggressive. That's up 10% from July. An Economist YouGov poll also showing that 55% of Americans say that they have very little confidence in ICE. You talk with the administration, they say that this level of enforcement is necessary. They are making good on a campaign promise, keeping Americans safe. How do you square that? I mean, it seems like we have sort of very polar opposites here as it relates specifically to this argument. The administration saying that this level of enforcement is necessary, and many Americans who say that it's a little too much.
I'm not sure there's an argument there to be squared, quite frankly, although they do seem to come out in different kinds of ways. I think where you started with those poll results was with what the promises were that people heard during the campaign. I think at least some people responding to polls are saying that's not quite what we thought the campaign was talking about in terms of going after the worst of the worst and making sure that people that were not in the country legally could be identified and under the circumstances, if they did not meet certain kinds of refugee requirements, for example, or didn't have other protected status, would be asked to leave the country quite promptly in a fair and manner in terms of following due process of all sorts of things. So I think that's the disconnect between what people thought they were hearing from the presidential candidates and what they're seeing now on the ground. I think that's part of it. The other thing that is perhaps worth paying attention to is that, at least from some of the polling I have seen, is that there is a divide not only between people who call themselves Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, but vast divides between people based on age cohorts. And especially younger respondents to polls are saying this is nowhere near what our values are or what we would like to see happening in the United States, even if they indeed did vote for Mr. Trump or are strong supporters of more conservative activities. So I think we've got all kinds of differences here in terms of how people are perceiving what's going on, what the information is telling them and where they receive their information, and the extent to which that information is credible and supported by additional evidence. So we have all of these difficult things going on as we're trying to make sense of what to do in a very uncertain, polarized, and quite frankly, frightening situation for a whole range of people.
Well, certainly we are in some interesting times, but historically we always seem to make it through. Dr. Karen Holt, Professor of Political Science at Virginia Tech University. Good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.